As the cosmos connects the universe, water connects life. At the Cosmic Water Podcast, we're exploring the history, mythology, and future of the sacred land known as San Antonio.
All right, welcome to Cosmic Water Podcast. I'm Maureen.
I'm Angela.
And today we have Teri Castillo with us, or Councilwoman Castillo. I wanted to start off by talking about, so this podcast is about like the history of San Antonio, the far history of San Antonio and how it's become what it's become. And one of the conversations that Angela and I seem to keep having is about how, like, I didn't learn this until college, about how Mexican Americans and like Latinos in general all over are a mixture of indigenous people and colonizers, which seems obvious when you think about it, but a lot of people don't see it that way, right? And so with regard to like history and place and land, if you could share with us your family history to this land or wherever they come from.
Yeah, so thank y'all for having me on this podcast. Really exciting to be here. I am depending on what side of the family we're talking about, right, I have a different history. For example, my dad's side, they fled during the Mexican Revolution and found a home in West Side San Antonio, whereas my mom's side is 8th generation San Antonio resident, going way back. She has more, she calls like Chicano roots, right? But also acknowledging that I didn't know till high school, community college, right, that the state of Texas was at one point Mexico. And the whole, we didn't cross the border crossed us. And so my family history is my dad's side, my grandmother and my great-grandmother, they were born here in the United States, but their parents were the ones that fled during the Mexican Revolution. And my great-grandparents on my mother's side have lived within the same neighborhood where I live till today, which is really nice, that my uncles live like 2 houses away. And it's always been like that, like a community where it's tios and tias living right next to each other. And we're very grounded and rooted in that place, which is the inner west side, like off of Guadalupe and Trinity. And, it's not unique. Many of my neighbors have the same story and have, the same family members who live right next door.
8 generations. How far back is that?
I don't know off the top of my head, but at San Fernando Cemetery 1, which is one of the oldest, like I have family there. Yeah.
Where's that at?
It's off of Guadalupe. It's near Guadalupe and Veracruz. It's one of like our West Side historic cemetery, and
Is it close to the creek?
Yep.
Right? Yeah, it's right there.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So you have roots in the West Side. When I first met you, was at one of those Fabiola was putting together those sessions. It was about housing. How long had you been like doing housing? Because I felt so bad, right? I thought that you worked for Esperanza, just because I was used to young people, young activists, right, working for an organization, but you were working for your neighbors, like for the community.
Yeah, and I remember it was with the For Everyone Home Initiative, and I was recently talking about that because we were talking about how do we get more folks to come out, and I was like, well, how I got plugged into some of this work was, there was a housing meeting and they're offering a gift card, and I was in college and I needed money, and there's an incentive. so like the HEB gift card that was like
I remember
raffled.
that gift card. Yes. I think I got something special for myself with it.
Yeah, and it's just, I lived in that community, was a member of the Historic West Side Residents Association, where we did a lot of tenant work and homeowner work as well, right, for folks feeling the pressures of code compliance and connecting them to city resources, and found like-minded individuals who were committed to our neighbors in the same way with the Historic West Side, which is also, the Esperanza are also members because they own property in the area, and they are the directors from the neighborhood as well. So like that's how we just got connected and been kind of bound to the same vision and goals like since.
It was through that For Everyone Home meeting?
I think that's what connected me to other individuals doing similar work in different parts of the city, right? Because sometimes when you're in the struggle, you think, wow, like it's just our community, but no, right? You get connected to the Jessica Guerreros and, you know, who was doing similar work in the East Side and has challenged displacement, and then seeing the lens and the work and the work that Fabiola was teasing out, right, through the community engagement process. And I recently brought up something that I learned from one of the first sessions I attended. We're talking about public housing and demolition and the housing crisis that we're experiencing now. And I remember this one individual that Fabiola brought in who was waiting for the bus, I believe, to come into the meeting. Yes. And he shared how he lived at the San Juan courts that got demolished, and he got relocated to the Victoria courts, or vice versa, one way or the other. And then the Victoria courts got demolished, and now he was at Haven, right? So just seeing the lack of affordable housing and how it's being demolished and it's limited, right? And where else are people going to go if we're not rebuilding that permanently affordable public housing? So I learned a lot from the stories from individuals who participated, as well as how it was facilitated with For Everyone Home.
And that was just one story from somebody at the bus stop, right? And that's what frustrates me the most. And you know that, like, anytime I'm showing up to these city hall meetings and stuff, it's just about, like, how are we getting stories and experiences from on the ground, because otherwise you guys are totally out of touch. And it comes down to literally the guy at the bus stop and just asking him his history here in San Antonio regarding housing. And that's like, and that's there's the information that you need to know, like, where do we fix stuff?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, just and I brought it up before, it just reminds me of how, like, the displacement is so generational. My mom was displaced from Hemisphere. And yeah, when Victoria Courts was demolished, so many families, I remember asking my aunt, like, what would Lavaca sound like or look like back in the day in the 60s and 70s? And the first thing she said was, you would see kids. You would see kids playing, and, you know, you would hear kids playing. And but yeah, so did you also work for Top? Did you do work with them?
I was a member, but I wasn't a worker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, Teri's like the most grassroots
for sure.
that you can get.
Because I did some work during that whole campaign for paid sick leave. Yeah. And it was because they paid well. So yeah, so we're talking about the gift card and opportunities and stuff like that. But, like, of course, like, it was easy work for me because you care about the cause, and it's easy to communicate with others.
And what I would add about your point, right, about, like, how there is a disconnect that exists between, like, elected officials and community. I was out block walking on last Friday, and one of the community members was like, why are you out here if you have, like, your staff? I was like, well, because I need to see for myself what's going on the ground so I know how to best, like, debate for our needs. And he's like, like, that's interesting, because, like, I like to see for myself where the failed streets and sidewalks are, where there's illegal dumping, right? And also to talk to my constituents about what their needs and their priorities are, because it's easy to read theory and stats, but if you don't hear the stories behind it, it's just you need both.
I always call it grounded knowledge. That's what I've been saying lately. Yes, the stats, the data. It's so frustrating that they always say that. And, you know, I'm still organizing with SAHA tenants, or Opportunity Home tenants. And one of our last meetings, there was some really big politician offices represented, and it was really frustrating that one of them was like, well, like, they're hearing all these stories directly from tenants, and they're like, well, if we just had some data to bring to this politician, then that would make it easier. And, like, I was like, that to me, when I hear that, it just means that, like, you're not going out on the street. Like, if you walk into any public housing building and ask 2 people questions, you'll get a very good idea about what's happening. And so how do we get that?
Yeah, and the constituent services stories are, like, the raw data, right? And that should be the driving factor and force behind policy, is the people that you represent and their needs are.
And so if you, as a politician, right, or elected representative or government official, what do you prefer being called?
I don't know.
Right? 'Cause, like,
Still, like, I don't know. Like, I always say like elected or a representative because I represent my people. I feel like a politician's more like they represent themselves in a way.
I know it has
yeah.
that kind of connotation to it.
Yeah.
That's why I kind of stopped myself. So as elected representative, we live in this representative democracy, right? So as this representative or any representative, like, yeah, you really don't know how to advocate for your constituents unless you're hearing those stories. And that just comes down to like your heart being in it. Like when you hear those stories, when I see elected representatives hearing these stories, you can see the like sort of like brightness in their eyes or something. I'm sure like you said with Villa Grande during that Brackenridge, is that how it felt like?
Yeah, that was really nice to see her speak up about the Brackenridge stuff and use words like, I think she said infuriating or something like yeah, like that, you know. So yeah, that's my district, District 3. Yeah. And so, yeah, so I've never met you, but I was asking around or saying, hey, we're going to have Teri. And everybody's like, oh, I've met her. So I love how accessible you are, you know, like that's a big deal. And people feel like, yeah, we can totally like email her or talk to her. So that's really great. I wanted to ask, from your position, because my son's school is being shut down, SAISD, Highland Park. And so is there still a chance so many parents at my school are organizing, getting petitions, going to the meetings. So is there a chance that we can change this at all? Because I just, you know, at that health symposium, the theme was like, what was it? That the city's adopting something about racism being a driving factor behind these sort of things. And so like when I was in high school, when I was in elementary, my parents lived in the same house off of Hackberry and Ada. They lived in the same house, yet I went to Bonham Elementary, I went to Charles C. Ball, then I was moved to Jaffet Elementary, I went to Steele Elementary.
You're naming a lot on the closure list of the schools, yeah.
And so that's my point is like, they keep messing with these kids' lives because it really did kind of mess up my education having to move, even despite my parents living in the same house the whole entire time. I was in GT. It wasn't like, you know, I had the brains, I guess, but like behavior wise, I was constantly having to perform or whatever to make new friends and being in a new space and that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
So it just sucks to see it happening again. And then historically, Black elementary schools, is that right? Like over in the East Side are being shut down. So how can we, I mean, just with organizing, right? And
yeah, absolutely. Like our office is a coalition member of the Schools Our Students Deserve Coalition, which is a coalition of students, teachers, parents, the San Antonio Alliance, which represents teachers and staff and personnel, as well as just a wide range of community members who organize around 10 different pillars. And because of that work, our office has been present in conversations with the superintendents and, of course, with the coalition members leading up to this process. And what we've all agree is that this is just moving far too fast. And ultimately, while City Council doesn't have a vote or say, I have a responsibility to ensure that the best interest of my constituency is being represented. And that's why I've gone to school board meetings and have been going to the meetings on the proposed consolidated and schools to be closed. And we've had a ton of walk-ins and calls regarding like, hey, why is this happening? How do we stop it? It's a done deal. And I encourage everyone to attend those school board meetings and those school closure meetings, because if we don't speak up, it is a done deal, right? But if we come together, we organize and we raise our concerns, I believe there's possibility to reduce the amount of schools on that list, because it's a ton of schools, 19. And as you alluded to, we mapped it out, our team, and the majority of them are in redlined areas. So you're just perpetuating harm and divestment in these communities that historically have just been divested. And it's just a vicious cycle. And we have a responsibility to say no, right? And then in my position, supporting my community members who are asking me to go speak at the school board meeting and say, this is moving too fast, we need more time, and not these schools. So I encourage folks to show up to the meetings. I believe October 16th, there's a school board meeting where they're going to discuss the closures and potentially make changes with the recommendations. And I think it's important that community goes and continues to express their concern with schools on the list. And again, it's just a process, in my opinion, that's moved far too quick.
Mm-hmm. I really like Highland Park. I really love the staff and the teachers there. My kids are really happy there. And you know, I've moved them around because education is so important. They did go to Steele, the Montessori. It just wasn't a good fit. Then they went to the Gathering Place, which is a great school, but it was just way too far. Mm-hmm. And then at Highland Park, you know, I actually get to know the families from my neighborhood. You know, I see them walking, and for Halloween, they see their classmates during there. When they went to their first Cub Scout meeting, they saw people they knew. They saw other kids that they knew. And you can't do that if and then I'm scared to put my kids on a bus, but I mean, it's because they hadn't have to do that up until, I guess it'll be in 2 years when they'll close, supposedly, Highland Park. So it's just, it's really frustrating, but like, I'm really hopeful because of how parents have already mobilized so quickly, right? Yeah. Because it's happened so quickly. So it's hopeful.
Yeah, and there's a wide range of reasons why the schools across the country are arguing for closures, right? Is low birth rate, lack of affordable housing, as well as losing kids to charter schools. But I think when we talk about when it comes to the housing piece, right? For example, we have a former mayor on the SEIC school board, and a former secretary of HUD pointed to our dilapidated housing within our urban core, to the lack of student enrollment to housing. It's like, hey, you were the mayor for 8 years, and then you were the secretary of HUD, right? So what went wrong? And how do we get things right? And how do we pull you in on the housing affordability conversation to make sure that we are producing deeply affordable housing that is intended for families? Because at the same time, right, we were incentivizing housing for efficiencies. So where are families supposed to live if we're only creating 1-bedroom housing stock?
And I have to give props to the program owner-occupied rehab, because my father's house was flipped with that program. And so otherwise he would have been in the same situation as a lot of our neighbors, where they're elderly now, and the major problems with the house: foundation, electrical, plumbing, which especially electrical is so important now that, I mean, before the house got flipped, during the summer, it was like winter. We would all just hang out in the 1-bedroom that had the good air conditioner, you know, and just like chill in there. You got to put foil on your windows, you know, like those sorts of things, just to like stay cool and not be fainting on your couch or whatever. So it would be awesome if programs like that like got like a huge amount of money, where it's not in a little lottery system. Like, our people deserve way more than a lottery system. So like, I want to advocate for programs like that, because there are answers, right? They just need money.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And we have the infrastructure, we just need to scale it up. Because right now it's just like, when we look at the ship that I know you helped shape, we're overproducing when it comes to market rate and unaffordable housing. It's the lower incomes where we're just not excelling, but we need to accelerate the amount of money that we're putting in those buckets.
I've actually, like, for me, it's so hard to even focus on the supply, because so much focus already goes on there, and it is important, because otherwise they're going to just like keep subsidizing all of these efficiencies and 1-bedrooms and market rates. Okay, in my neighborhood, they just built that 100 Labor Street, subsidized by Saha. One of the units is going for $4,000.
Wow.
I'm like, who approved this? And
who can afford that?
Nobody, no one. And like, most of the subsidies are for 1-bedrooms, and so it's just like, the way that I see housing, what it comes down to for me is supply and anti-displacement. And so since there's already so much focus on supply, to me, I'm just like, how do we prevent displacement? Because that part isn't really going to be solved through the supply. It's literally not possible to build enough that is needed. And so how do we just focus, for me, on to keep people where they're at? And that's hard. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of moving pieces. And to your point, right, for example, we have so many buildings that are sitting vacant because of LLCs, absentee landlords, and land speculators, and they're driving up values while also driving them down at the same time for the neighborhoods that they're in, causing these issues by allowing the property to deteriorate, only to come in and swoop and put something unaffordable when the market's right for them. So there's just so many moving pieces, and what we're finding in our area is that absentee landlords and land speculators are at the root of a ton of issues that we're experiencing, right? And what's frustrating is we have so many unhoused individuals, but so many vacant buildings. So, you know, okay, build, but also like housing exists, but it's being looked at as a commodity. So we're just going to let it sit there till we can capture as much money as we can while folks continue to live on the street, you know, and are on the waiting list. That's it's over it's increased since the pandemic is my understanding. It's just so many moving pieces, but there's solutions, right? But what it comes down to is just challenging corruption, right? Because folks are afraid of specific industries because they donate to campaigns and they wield power if you allow them to. So it's just also considering those factors and forces too that are at play at the same time.
Yeah. Man, I'm just so glad that you're in city council, really. And I don't know, I'm so proud of you. Yeah, because you chose to run during 2020, right? Like a really challenging time overall, and having no experience as like a politician, right? As an elected representative, or even like in those offices, right? Like for you, it was just like going from the neighborhood, literally like organizing with your neighbors into City Hall, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how you made that. And so I'm curious, I feel like I could ask a bunch of questions, but I want to ask, like, for you, can you think of like even just like one particular moment where you were like doing the work of your neighbors? Like it was all coming together, like everything that you had done just sort of like was coming together and making progress, and like what you envisioned when you first decided to run, which must have been a really difficult decision, right?
It was, in that there were a number of things that led up to that point. But what was one of the many driving factors was when we were organizing around the demolition and displacement of Alazan residents, and with the Historic West Side Residents Association, folks coming to us and saying, I'm about to get evicted, or I've been evicted, help me, right? And Letty Sanchez was also going door to door and was doing a lot of the case management, right? Despite her, like that not being her occupation. Again, it was just like, because we wanted to take care of each other. And you know, realizing that, you know, these are policy decisions that were happening. It wasn't just because this is just how things are. There's lack of buffers to keep families in their homes. And then there was also the piece of, it was a strategy to get people out so they could demolish it. Because if there's X amount of vacancies within it, they could knock it down. So also recognizing that when we were meeting with the David Bocha at the time, and he changed his strategy on how to get people out. So it went from bogus fines and fees to, you know, you're just not paying your rent on time. So when we found how they were trying to get people out, and we got them to make changes to that, they changed their strategy. But ultimately, it all came up to communities coming together from all over the city of San Antonio to get him out.
Yes, I think that's what I'm trying to ask, and that makes total sense. Is that for me, whenever I see the communities coming together to make impact like that, it just like makes me glow. Like my whole heart, everything just gets so warm. And so for you, what have been some of those biggest moments besides that? Like since you've been in City Hall? Oh
yeah, so a number of things. Primarily the housing bond. So when there was first conversation about a $250 million housing bond, I was very skeptical. I was like, this is going to be a handout for market rate developers, and they're just going to swoop in and capitalize, and we're just going to further subsidize that through public dollars, right? So I was so skeptical in that I believe I was only one of there are two of us that I didn't say anything on the item when it came to the housing bond, because I was like, this is just like, it's not going to work out, right? And then somehow during conversation it got reduced from 250 to 150. And then it went through the committee process, and our appointee, Kayla, she put in language for public housing, and she was successful by 1 vote. And keep in mind, my predecessor was one of the co-chairs who voted no and was like, I don't think it's legal for us to fund public housing. And by 1 vote, we secured the deep affordability parameters, and we secured language for public housing. But again, it was just organizing and working with the other board members, but also, now folks are like, this is the greatest bond. Look at us, we're doing such a great job. But the fact that, by 1 vote, like, it could have been a whole different bond, was one of those pieces where I was like, let's go. Like, this is why we're here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yes, that's so true. I feel that tension all of the time of the frustration and the skepticism, and I'm like, what's the point in trying to get into policy? They're just going to do whatever they can to make it benefit, whoever they want ultimately anyway. But I guess I just need to you need to write me a whole book of all of those kinds of successes so that I can constantly remind myself, yeah, it does matter. Because the Mayor's Housing Policy Task Force, it was only because Maria Berriosabel had put so much language in there about participation, community participatory work. Literally, that word was the only word I could use against Vero Soto in the city to say, you have to go to the people. I'm like, look, it says it in here, participatory, you have to go to the people. And so it does make a difference. And sometimes it's hard for me to see that.
Yeah, but that's the goal and the point. And I was talking to a friend about what's power, right? And it's is it having X amount of electeds in power that are in alignment, or is it having organized community? And I'm like, well, to me, it's one or the other, I would say community, but you need a hybrid, right? You need someone who's going to be on the dais to be on the side with the community. That's also where community is driving what's being said. So I think it's both. But you can't do it without community. It just, again, if we didn't have community members on the bond, we would have a whole different bond. You have to have community to help push things along.
And you have to have people like you, even though I'm reluctant to say that. And I'm so, grateful that you're there. But you do have to have people like you, because hierarchy is just inevitable. And so if we don't have people like you up at the top, then they just get to do whatever.
Yeah. It's wild, right? Because sometimes we think about how my predecessor is pro-demolish public housing, and how I'm the complete opposite of that. And
thank goodness.
Yeah. But how she was pushing things that way and giving everyone the green light. It's just wild.
It really is. I hate those types of people so much when they have that much power, and they just continue to do terrible things like that. I'm thinking about some people, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But how do you handle having to work with people like that?
So, I'll use a more recent example, right? The Scobie development within District 5, that's a vacant building that Via bought, I believe, in 2015. And I don't remember the exact date, but, they've been sitting there with this property, allowing it to deteriorate. And now they have this vision of 50% market rate and just really expensive housing, a few units, right, that are somewhat affordable, but it's few given the census tract that it's in. And all this without community input and engagement, and how is this going to impact the ridership, and how does ridership feel about it? And it's just working with community on what's your vision. For example, we're part of a coalition as well in regards to housing, and they had a lot of questions around Scobie, and VIA had canceled meetings, wasn't doing any public input regarding this project in particular. So community took it upon themselves to host a community event, right? Scobie for the people, right? What do the people envision here at this project? And, gathering stories from there and hearing from community there, and using that to develop what my goals and expectations are with this project based off of community coming together.
Nice.
So it's I've met with my community. I know what they want, what they don't want, and they've even taken it upon themselves to organize and to come up with their Scobie for the people. And it's just ultimately, to your point, right, is going back to community.
I'm just so pleased to hear, because that was a big deal. Like, it's not my district or whatever, but I just kept hearing about people organizing and feeling so strongly about it. So it's nice to know there's inside happenings. And,
yeah, and that you get to have those experiences all the time, because that's what, like, I can't even express. I love seeing community come together. And maybe I'm not, like, involved enough because I've been so, like, skeptical. You know, I've stepped back from a lot of organizing, activism stuff because of all the challenges. And so I'm so glad that you get to have those experiences frequently.
Yeah. And I get it, right? Like, it could be, it is frustrating when it's just like things happen and it's just like, this is not in alignment with community. This is not in alignment with the goals and the studies that we've commissioned, and we're going in a different direction
than what you said. You guys said this is what you're going to do, and then they just totally ignore it all.
Yeah. And I think I went to that symposium that Metro Health had as well, and I facilitated a conversation on incarceration. And, you know, it was a packed room, and one of the attendees was like, why do we allow this to happen? We know, you know, putting people and locking them up for low-level crimes is only creating more issues in our communities, and it doesn't heal anyone. It doesn't put folks down a different path. It just perpetuates the system. And, you know, she was very passionate in saying, like, why? And, like, we hold the power as community members. And someone mentioned, you know, like, in different countries, like, they've taken it to the streets, but the system still continues in that direction. And I had to, you know, raise my hand and be like, you know, we can't ignore the corruption that exists within governments, right? And that corruption can look like a number of things, but ultimately these folks contribute to campaigns. You know, if you don't do what they say, they're going to contribute to someone else. And I think that's what folks are afraid of. But also, like, as a community, we have to acknowledge, like, that wields so much power and it shouldn't. And how do we challenge that? Is, like, we call it out, and that, you know, you're saying all this good stuff, like the rhetoric's perfect, but you're voting a different way, and it needs to be called out because that's how you stop it. And I believe Maureen said public shaming gets the goods, or you said something along those lines.
That sounds like you. That sounds like you.
Me. That's always my, like, actually, I've thought that a couple times in my head. I'm like, what's your solution? But in my head, I'm like, just call them out. Like, get rid of them. Shame them until they go. Like, I mean, really, like, if you're going to do terrible things, that's how I felt about, like, Saha. Recently in the past year, I would just show up to every single board meeting and be like, you guys closed down a daycare center. How did you allow that to happen? And how are you allowing the people who did that to keep working for you if you're really going to like try to work for a community? And I just kept doing that until those people left. Like, and now, you know, now I feel like, okay, like I do feel like they're listening, and that's the thing I always try to tell people. And I wonder, I have this question for you then, like how to get community to be able to speak up at like public comment and whatnot, because to me, like, it really is powerful. Like, people are like, oh, it's only 3 minutes, and they don't even listen. I'm like, I love my 3 minutes. Like, that is my 3 minutes to look the mayor in the eye and say whatever I want, and he has to listen to me. And it does make a difference. Like, that's why I don't even really do like activism organizing stuff anymore. I'm like, I'll just show up to board meetings or to you know, Citizens to be Heard and just speak my piece. And I know that they'll hear it. So how do you think that's helpful, first off, and then how to get more people to see the value in that?
Yeah, I think public comment is very impactful, right? Because to what we were talking about earlier, is those constituent services stories is what drives or should drive the policy. And what we do is, depending on, like, I meet with my constituent services team and we discuss trends, right? So how many calls are we receiving about illegal dumping, about encampments, about zoning? And then if there's an item that comes up relating to those issues, we ping them and say, hey, this item's coming up. I know you had some thoughts, like, we want to invite you to come in, your parking will be validated, and just letting them know what's going through the process. But at the same time, you know, the agenda is often posted 2 days before the meeting, and folks have like responsibilities and they can't always make it, but we try our best to let them know, hey, this item's coming up. We can walk you through signing up for public comment and just being a resource, and then also letting them know that it is impactful, because for our communities, we just haven't been listened to, and then we haven't been respected. So I understand the erosion and distrust with the political process.
And particularly of the West Side. I remember saying a few years ago, maybe even like 6 years ago, when I was organizing with Soapworks, how, and like I started to see, right, I came from Portland and saw how gentrification happened there, and I was like I can see it as it's about to happen here too. And even then I remember saying to Jessica, I was like, I feel like it's the West Side. I feel like the West Side is gonna like stop it. Like they just have that I don't know, power, right? And there is historically that power there with like, I mean, I guess Emma Tenayuka came from the West Side, right? And then there was all of the drainage issues.
Yeah, with Cop
like in the 50s. Yeah, and I don't know. I don't even know. Countless other stories, like amazing people who come out of the West Side and change things. And so, yeah, now that you're there, and actually like it gentrification isn't really hitting the West Side as hard as it could be, right?
I agree, right? In that we've, as a city council, we've shifted the direction where we put our money and what's our priority. I'm grateful that while we don't always agree, my colleagues, when it comes to housing, we are now set on like those SHIP goals and how do we meet those needs. But again, right, elections happen, bodies change, and it could easily go another direction, like quickly. So I think we're doing as best as we can, and that's what's helping stave off like mass displacement. But no doubt, right, folks with capital are scooping up property, they're land speculating, and those interests are there. And now it's a conversation about, are we going to use public dollars to incentivize and accelerate? Absolutely not, right? But again, there's individuals where that's like their jam, and that's how they want to do things.
Yes, that's what you had said, that because I spoke at the Equity Forum at the housing session, and Angela had said that was what you had gotten out of what me and Rebecca had spoken on, was that gentrification is government funded, right? And so if you have somebody in there who's not allowing the government to put all of those funds into the community, then it can't happen as quickly. But when we have the government giving money to private sectors to redevelop and develop or gentrify these areas, then it's government facilitated. It's our own government displacing people. Isn't that like what it comes down to?
Yeah, right. And folks always say, electeds always say, or politicians, I'll say, like, oh, this phenomenon of gentrification, we don't know how to stop it or stave it off. It's like, we do, you know, it just takes political will and, you know, to change things a bit. And an example of that is, I remember when we were coming up with our legislative agenda priorities, and I wanted to ensure that, you know, public housing was a priority. And I remember being told, well, you know, this person sits on the housing committee and they're a Republican. And I was like, okay, right. So I reached out to that Republican and took him to the Castellanos and to the Alazans, and then he earmarked $2 million for public housing, despite this person being a Republican. But, you know, he went and offered, like, show me the properties you want me to tour. We went, and then, you know, he ensured that he put money towards public housing. So it's just, it's very frustrating, because there are individuals who are willing to support and invest, but sometimes when it comes to like institutions and structures, that's just not their priority. But going back to what you asked about, like, what's something where I was like very proud of, is with this last budget, we worked with Castellano Tenants and COPS Metro and Opportunity Home to create a Opportunity Home maintenance fund, minor maintenance fund. Because we have folks like James Hamilton, who's been coming to City Hall saying this elevator's been broken. We have tenants saying, you know, I'm living with mold, but also acknowledging the reality that public housing is like severely underfunded, and they just aren't being allocated the funds necessary to do minor maintenance. And of course, it's all intentional by the federal government, in my opinion. But that $1 million fund is the first public housing fund in the state of Texas to like, for cities to give money.
Yeah, that was just recent, right?
Yeah. So it's $1 million. It's a drop in the bucket, but it's a start towards like something greater.
The rent relief policy started as $1 million. It was just $1 million to go towards it. And then that created, like, do you know how much money it ultimately went through that policy?
Oh, so much. Millions.
That was because of the work we did overseeing. We're like, okay, we got $1 million. What are we going to do with it? We got to take it to the people, collect like the right data, not just like whatever, but how do we talk to the people and make sure that the data represents what they're going through. I mean, we did so much work on that policy. And then, once COVID hit and the federal government was able to just like push so much through San Antonio specifically. I wonder how much money it was ultimately.
A ton, especially because I know like CARES funding and ARPA money went through there as well. So like so much.
Where other cities and states and counties were failing, the federal government would just push it into San Antonio because we had that program. I mean, they all got it from here. And it's just like, that's another example of just, I'm like, what's the point in doing any policy work? Like, they just mess up everything. But it's like, that was literally millions of dollars that came into San Antonio because of that, just despite a lot of landlords abusing that policy.
You know, I really appreciate your love for history. You know, I think that's where your power seems to come from too, is like, because you do see these things as not as a, individual, gentrification. Oh, it's just happening here or whatever. That it's actually a historical thing that's been happening. And then plus you have your own family history that can be so grounding to have. And then you appreciate the individual story because you appreciate history. But yeah.
I know. I'm just so happy that we have you on City Council. And it really gives me a lot more hope than I tend to have.
And I will say, right, like, again, sometimes when you're like the only one advocating for specific things, it's kind of like I'm yelling at a wall. But then I hear community, saying like, no, this is what we need. And it is grounding to me, because sometimes it's just like I'm the only one that's like thinks we shouldn't be investing in market rate, period. And just like pieces like that, it's just like I'm literally the only one up here like this stinks. But I know that there's community that has the same vision and values as well.
Maria Berriosabel had said that so many times she was the only no vote. And what her office would do is put like a huge banner on her door at City Hall that had like big no. Anytime that happened. She in her book. I brought you her book, right? Because what I loved about that, this one part, I think I say it's like anytime I have like a meeting with a politician. Or a politician or an elected representative, either. I loved in Maria's book when she spoke about, she used her office as a space for community to organize within. Like, that hit me so hard when I read that, and I just say it repeat it all the time. I'm like, what else are you doing here? Not to you, I know that you no, but like when I bring it up to others, I'm just like what else are you doing there except trying to get your community involved in choices that impact them.
And Rachel on our team and Taylor, who used to be with us, they had proposed to me, what we now call Office to the People, right? And essentially, like, we'll be out in the field rather than the field office, so that way folks who don't know we exist, don't know where we're at, don't know what a city council office is, know who we are by us going to their door. So we have what we call Office to the People, but that's because, Rachel and Taylor proposed that, and it's something that we do once a month, and when we have other slots available, we'll do it. And it's just people don't know what a city council member is or our role, but if we go to their doors and talk to them and introduce ourselves, they will. So that's another piece that we've done too. Like, we've convened, but then we also make it a priority to go to the doors.
That's amazing. And has that brought some of your constituents like to speak up?
Yes. And it's something that I'm really proud of, because this past budget meeting, we saw an increase in attendance, and there were new faces, but they're faces that we met at the doors and encouraged to come out.
Nice.
So it was great. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, door to door is seriously the best way is to do that. Soap works. Literally, like, any weekend I didn't have my kids, I would just be knocking on my neighbor's doors. There's 380 units there. Wow. And sometimes people would just sort of be like, well, what are we going to do? Like like we're getting displaced. They're going to kick us out. There's nothing that we can do. And I'll just sit there and talk to them and just continue to talk to them and explain it. And at the end, they'd be like, yeah, I hear you. So like if we all come together and we do that, then we speak up and then they'll listen. I'm like, yes, exactly. And like, it's just the best feeling ever to see people who didn't think that they even could, didn't know how. It didn't even cross their mind, recognize that like, oh, like I do have a voice, especially when supported, and especially when supported by a councilwoman.
Yeah.
Amazing. Any other questions? Concerns, comments?
I want to know the cheese man.
All right. Let's go up there.
Yeah, that was all the questions I had.
SAISD, hit that up. Yeah.
Good for you.
And October 16th, I believe, is a school board meeting. So we want to encourage parents, community members to come out because these are public spaces and they belong to the people, and the people should have a say in what happens to the schools.
Yes, public money for public spaces. I feel like that's what I'm getting out of, a lot of what I'm getting out of this conversation, personally.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teri. I know that you got called out into executive session, so I appreciate you showing up anyway.
Yeah, thanks,
All
y'all.
right.
Alrighty, that's a wrap.